The scariest, creepiest experience of my life happened while I was stationed in Germany with the army. I had been living there for several months, in a small town surrounded by beautiful countryside and old cobblestone streets that seemed like something out of a fairy tale. The town had a rich history that went back centuries, with some buildings that were easily over 100 years old, including the house where I lived. I rented a room from an elderly German couple who owned one of these old houses. They were kind, quiet people who kept mostly to themselves. The house itself had the charm of a place worn by time. High ceilings, creaky floorboards, and thick stone walls that made you feel as if you had stepped back in time. When I first moved in, the couple had warned me, half-jokingly, that the house had a reputation for being haunted. They didn't give any details, and I didn't ask for any. Honestly, I didn't think much of it at the time. I had grown up hearing ghost stories and urban legends, and while they were fun to listen to, I never really believed in that kind of thing. Besides, I had enough on my plate with my duties in the military, and I didn't have time to entertain spooky folklore. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I got into a routine: work, sleep, the occasional trip to a local pub. My wife had come with me to Germany, and we were both settling into the rhythm of our new life overseas. The room we rented was cozy but a bit cramped, separated by a wooden room divider. On one side was a small sitting area, and on the other was our bed, tucked into the corner beneath a window. The atmosphere was quiet, peaceful even, but sometimes it was too quiet, like the house had a stillness that didn't quite feel right. One night, everything changed. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I had just come back from the bathroom, which was about 20 feet down the hall from our room. I had left my wife asleep in bed and tried to move quietly so I wouldn't wake her. I entered the room, locked the door behind me, just like I always did, and turned off the light. The house, being as old as it was, had one of those heavy, old-fashioned light switches with a stiff spring. You couldn't just lightly tap it. It made a loud, satisfying snap when you turned it off or on, so there was no doubt in my mind that I had shut it off properly. I walked over to the bed, which was on the other side of the room divider, and as soon as I sat down, the light flipped back on. At first, I froze, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was racing with explanations. Maybe the switch was faulty, or I hadn't turned it off all the way, but that didn't make sense. This switch was either on or off. There was no in-between. The spring mechanism was too strong for it to get stuck halfway. And then it hit me. If the light had been turned on by someone, they would have had to unlock the door first. But I had locked it myself, and the key, an old skeleton key, was still in the lock on the inside of the room. If someone had used a key from the other side, it would have pushed my key out, and I would have heard it fall onto the floor. But the key hadn't moved. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I didn't want to freak out. I slowly stood up and made my way to the door, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. When I checked the room, no one was there. The door was still locked, and the key was exactly where I had left it. My wife, still half asleep, mumbled something, but I didn't tell her what had happened. I didn't want to scare her or admit to myself that I was spooked. The incident gnawed at me, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe the old house was playing tricks on me. But things didn't stop there. A few nights later, I was in the sitting area of our room, reading a book while my wife slept. It was a peaceful evening, and I was starting to feel more at ease. Out of nowhere, I heard a sound like metal scraping against wood. My eyes darted toward the coffee table, where a heavy 5-inch wide ashtray, one of those big bar ashtrays, had begun to spin slowly on its edge, as if someone had knocked it over. The noise was unmistakable. It sounded like the ashtray had been tipped over and was now spinning down to a stop. I sat there, staring at it, as the ashtray settled back onto the table. When I went to check, the cigarette butts that had been inside were now scattered across the table. The ashtray hadn't been on its side when I left it, so how had it suddenly moved? My heart was racing. The room felt colder than it had moments before, and I felt that same eerie stillness in the air, like the house was holding its breath. Then came the final, most terrifying event. My wife and I had gone to bed early one night. I had been working the swing shift as an MP, so I wasn't home until after midnight most nights. That evening, I returned around 1 a.m., tired and ready for bed. When I walked in, my wife looked pale and shaken. She asked me if I had been in the room earlier. I told her no, and she went on to explain what had happened. She said that at around midnight, she had been lying in bed when she felt the distinct pressure of someone kneeling on the mattress beside her. She had assumed it was me returning home early, but when she opened her eyes, no one was there. As she lay there, frozen, she suddenly felt a cold hand press against her back. Startled, she quickly turned on the small lamp beside the bed, but the room was empty. No one was there, and the door was still locked. That's when I came in, and she told me the whole story. After that night, we decided enough was enough. The creepy occurrences were getting too frequent, and we were both feeling unnerved in a place that should have felt like home. Within a week, we moved out of the house and found a new place to live, just around the corner. Interestingly, once we moved, the strange happenings stopped entirely. Our new home was quiet, peaceful, and, most importantly, normal. To this day, I don't know what was going on in that old house. Maybe it really was haunted, or maybe there were things happening that we just couldn't explain. But whatever it was, I'm glad we left when we did. The memories of that place still send a shiver down my spine, and I've never experienced anything like it since.